the demon masquerading as a human. When I was young, there was a legend in our village that on the full moon of the 7th month, demons would disguise themselves as humans and come out to borrow rice. It was absolutely forbidden to lend them any. If you lent them rice, the demon could enter your courtyard and harm people. Part 1. As dusk began to fall, I heard a sound outside our courtyard gate. I ran to the gate and saw an old woman with white hair standing outside. In her hand, she held a broken bowl, looking incredibly pitiable. "This old woman looks unfamiliar. She's not from our village," I said. "Grandma, who are you looking for?" The old woman heard my call and her eyes slowly moved, finally settling on me. On her face, she seemed to be forcing a smile, which looked very stiff and unpleasant. The old woman opened her mouth and said, "Hey, kid, is your grandfather's name Louis?" Her voice was murky and eerie, and her gaze at me was shifty and probing, as if she was examining me. I nodded, "Yes, it is." The old woman grinned, revealing a set of perfectly white teeth. She said, "Then it's true. Your grandfather saw how pitiful I was and told me to come to your house for half a bowl of raw rice." "Raw rice? It must be raw rice, don't get it wrong." When the old woman said the words, "raw rice," her eyes widened terrifyingly, and her tone became chilling, very frightening. I said, "Today is the full moon of the 7th month. I cannot lend out rice." The moment I finished speaking, the smile on the old woman's face froze. Her expression darkened, becoming even more terrifying, as if she wanted to devour me. Instinctively, I recoiled 2 steps to distance myself from her. The old woman scowled and said, "Why isn't this child listening? Your grandfather told me to get raw rice. Hurry up and get me raw rice." I explained that on the full moon of the 7th month, demons disguise themselves as humans to borrow rice, and today I couldn't lend any. Before leaving, my grandmother had specifically warned me not to lend rice to anyone today, no matter who came, and absolutely not to step out of the courtyard gate. Seeing that I wouldn't lend the rice, the old woman stared at me, her eyes exuding an ominous and chilling aura. But very quickly, she switched to a different, pitiful expression, saying, "Oh, child, I haven't eaten for 3 days. I'm about to starve to death. Please save me." As the old woman spoke, tears streamed down her face, her cries mournful, yet her facial expression was that of a grin with narrowed eyes. I remembered hearing the village elders say that demons don't cry and cannot make crying expressions. Even if their cries sound mournful, their faces will still be smiling. A chill ran down my spine, and my scalp tingled. A demon had truly come to borrow rice. I mustered all my courage and said, "Grandma, please don't cry anymore. I'll go get you the rice." My grandmother had warned me before she left. If I encountered a demon trying to borrow rice, I must absolutely not panic. I couldn't let the demon know that I had discovered it wasn't human. Seeing my agreement to lend the rice, the old woman grinned. She said, "Good child, hurry and get the rice. Remember, it must be raw rice." I nodded, turned, and ran towards the east house. I closed the door to the east house, then jumped out through the back window. I followed the small path, running towards the village chief's house. Today, the village chief was building a new house, and my grandparents were both there helping out. I ran desperately, constantly feeling as if that old woman was chasing me from behind. I don't know how long I ran before finally reaching the chief's house. My grandfather saw me, first startled, then opened his mouth to ask, "Arthur, what's wrong with you?" I looked down at my pants. They were covered in mud with several long tears. I had run so fast earlier that I fell several times without feeling any pain. Gasping for breath, I said, "Demon, there's a demon." It came to borrow rice. Part 2. Everyone in the courtyard was stunned, their eyes filled with panic. My grandfather said, "Arthur, you're not mistaken, are you?" I said no, I wasn't mistaken, a demon disguised as an old woman. The moment I finished speaking, I heard a clang. The chief's wife, Sarah, her hand trembling, dropped the iron basin she was holding. Hot pig's blood spilled all over the ground. The chief said angrily, "What are you doing? Can't you even hold a basin?" Sarah's face was filled with guilt, and she stammered for a long time, as if hiding something. My grandfather frowned and said, "Sarah, you didn't lend any raw rice to anyone today, did you?" Everyone in the village looked towards Sarah. Her hands were trembling, and she didn't speak for a long time, her eyes filled with fear. The chief was so angry he stomped his foot, scowling. "I'm asking you, speak up. Sarah softly mumbled, "No, I didn't lend any." My grandfather stared at her for a moment. He said, "Sarah, if you didn't lend rice, why are you panicking? This isn't something you can lie about." The chief glared fiercely at his wife, angrily saying, "Speak now, if you dare to lie, I'll beat you to death." Sarah glanced at the chief, her eyes holding a strange look, but then quickly turned back to my grandfather. She said, "Uncle, I'm so scared. This morning, an old woman did come to borrow rice. I thought since we were building a house today, and I wanted some good luck, I agreed to give her rice. But when I went into the storage room, I suddenly remembered it was the full moon of the 7th month, so I gave her half a bowl of cooked rice. She wouldn't take it, cursed me, and left." Hearing the chief's wife's words, everyone in the courtyard breathed a sigh of relief. Only my grandfather's face remained worried. He said, "It's almost dark. We should check if the demon has entered the courtyard." Sarah said, "Uncle, don't you believe me?" My grandfather said, "Sarah, it's not that I don't believe you, but I'm afraid the demon might have tricked you. I'm just afraid you might have given it raw rice." The moment my grandfather finished speaking, everyone in the courtyard was stunned, their eyes filled with fear. The village elders said that powerful demons could use illusions to deceive people. The chief took 2 puffs of his pipe, coughed twice, and said, "Louis, do you have any solution?" My grandfather said, "Get half a bowl of water and a chopstick, then stick the chopstick into the bowl. If the chopstick stands upright, it means the demon has entered the courtyard and is just waiting for nightfall to harm people. If the chopstick doesn't stand up, then the courtyard is safe." The chief frowned and said, "David, go get a bowl and chopsticks." Sarah anxiously said, "I'll go get them. David is too young, he can't hold them steadily." After saying this, she hurried into the storage room. Very quickly, she brought out the bowl and chopsticks. My grandfather stuck the chopstick into the bowl, and everyone in the courtyard gathered around, staring at the bowl of water. After a few minutes, the chopstick still didn't stand up. Sarah said, "I told you I gave cooked rice. Are you relieved now?" After saying this, she poured out the water in the bowl. My grandfather frowned and said, "Sarah, what's the hurry? Wait a little longer." Sarah snapped, "Uncle, everyone saw it. The chopstick didn't stand up. If a demon had truly entered the courtyard, the chopstick would have stood up much earlier. Everyone's been tired all day, let's eat dinner early." My grandfather said that powerful demons have their tricks. This matter cannot be rushed. Part 3. The chief's wife, Sarah, glared at my grandfather and angrily said, "I think you're just looking for trouble. I already said I gave cooked rice. What more do you want?" As Sarah finished speaking, tears welled up in her eyes, her face filled with grievance. Usually, Sarah was a quiet and unassuming person, never arguing with anyone. Everyone in the courtyard spoke up in her defense, telling my grandfather not to be so insistent. Enough was enough. The chief's son, Daniel, pointed at my grandfather's nose and cursed, "You old geezer, my family is building a new house. What are you doing causing trouble? My mother already said she gave cooked rice and you keep harping on it. What do you want?" The chief kicked Daniel, saying, "You ungrateful brat, is that how you talk to your Uncle Louis? You have no respect." Daniel snorted coldly and said nothing. My grandfather frowned and said, "Sarah, I'm thinking of everyone. Today is the full moon of the 7th month. It's not like any other day. Today, it's not just a demon disguised as a human, it's more like the demon asterisk is asterisk human. You fundamentally can't tell with your naked eye, and by the time it gets dark, it will be too late." The sun was visibly setting, and the sky grew a little gloomy. The chief sighed and said, "Louis, what else do you want to do?" My grandfather said, "Chief, the wood for your main beam is peach wood. Peach wood wards off evil. If we take down the main beam, cut a section to make a threshold, the demon won't be able to enter. We can all hide inside the house and wait until morning, then we'll be safe." The moment my grandfather finished speaking, Daniel pointed at my grandfather's nose and cursed. He said, "Old man, I think you've gone mad. The main beam is like a person's spine. Removing it is like pulling out a spine. Do you want our Chen family to never be able to stand tall again? What are your intentions?" After Daniel finished speaking, he looked at the chief and said, "Father, he's just here to cause trouble. Chase him away." The chief scowled, angrily saying, "Louis, what kind of solution is this? Can the main beam just be removed casually?" My grandfather said, "Chief, it's almost dark. There's no more time. Are human lives more important, or is the main beam more important? The chief angrily said, "You still can't even confirm whether the demon has entered the courtyard or not, and you want to remove the main beam? I think you're deliberately trying to get revenge." My grandfather was stunned for a few seconds. He said, "Revenge? What revenge?" The chief snorted coldly and snapped, "You know perfectly well in your heart, do I need to spell it out? Today is an important day for my family, building a new house. I want to attract some good luck. No one should cause any unhappiness. If anyone doesn't want to stay, they can leave." After the chief finished speaking, he looked at his wife and said, "Hurry up and make dinner, everyone's hungry." Sarah nodded, leading several younger wives into the storage room. The chief sat leaning against the wall, smoking his pipe. The others in the courtyard gathered in small groups, chatting, leaving my grandfather to one side. My grandmother complained, "Old man, say a few less words. If you offend the chief, we won't have any peaceful days." My grandfather frowned and said, "My right eye keeps twitching. I feel like the demon has already entered the courtyard. It's just waiting for nightfall." As my grandfather said this, he glanced at the villagers around him. Each person had a shadow. My grandmother said this was baseless, and he should stop scaring people. My grandfather frowned and said, "Old woman, go get another half bowl of water and a chopstick. Don't let Sarah see. I want to test again." My grandmother sighed. She said, "All right, I'll go get it." Very quickly, my grandmother brought out the bowl of water and chopsticks. My grandfather found a secluded spot, stuck the chopstick into the bowl, and waited a few minutes. The chopstick did not stand up. My grandfather frowned and said, "It really hasn't entered the courtyard." The moment my grandfather finished speaking, the chopstick eerily stood upright. It floated in the bowl. My grandfather's eyes widened instantly. He said, "A demon, the demon has entered the courtyard." Part 4. The moment my grandfather finished speaking, the sun dipped below the horizon. In an instant, the surroundings became eerily dark, and a chilling wind swept through, making our spines tingle. The bowl of water clattered and shook incessantly, the water inside sloshing out, but the chopstick within remained perfectly still, suspended in the water. My grandfather hurriedly yelled towards the villagers, "Come quickly, the chopstick is standing." Everyone in the village was stunned, their heads snapping up to look at my grandfather. They gathered around, their faces panicked. Seeing the chopstick standing upright in the bowl of water, their eyes instantly widened and their voices trembled. What is this?" My grandfather's expression was tense. He stared at the upright chopstick in the bowl of water and asked, "Where is the demon? Please point to a direction." As my grandfather finished speaking, the bowl of water shook even more violently, making a thumping sound. The wind howled louder, its sound like wailing ghosts and roaring wolves. It was chilling to hear, and the sky grew ominous, though faces could still be seen clearly. The sun had set, but there was still some lingering light. The villagers, seeing the violently shaking bowl of water, were considerably frightened. Thomas's face turned pale. He said in terror, "It's almost completely dark now. The demon is right here in the courtyard. What should we do?" My grandfather had beads of cold sweat on his forehead. He said, "First, don't panic. Let me ask. Once we know clearly, we'll know what to do and avoid being misled by the demon." After saying this, my grandfather stared at the chopstick standing upright in the bowl and asked, "Who is the demon? Please point it out." My grandfather told the villagers to stand in a circle, placing the bowl of water in the middle. Black smoke began to rise from the chopstick in the water. Everyone in the village stared at the bowl of water, their eyes filled with panic, each fearing the chopstick would point towards them. Seconds and minutes passed, but the chopstick in the water remained unresponsive. Seeing that it was almost completely dark, Daniel grew impatient. He said frantically, "Why is there no reaction yet?" "Who exactly is the demon?" The moment Daniel finished speaking, there was a asterisk snap asterisk. The chopstick in the bowl broke, as if it had been deliberately snapped by a hand. Everyone in the village's eyes widened, filled with terror. This chopstick was broken by the vengeful spirit. It doesn't want to reveal its location. "It's right here among us," my grandfather said worriedly. "While it's not completely dark yet, everyone quickly run towards the Guanyin temple." Daniel frowned and said, "The Guanyin temple has been abandoned for decades. No one offers incense there. Can it stop a vengeful spirit?" My grandfather's face became grim. He said, "For now, this is the only way. I can't say if it will work or not." The moment my grandfather finished speaking, the chief ferociously kicked his wife. She fell to the ground. No one in the courtyard tried to stop him, they all felt she deserved it. The chief's expression was vicious. He said, "Did you lend out the rice?" Sarah said in fear. "No, I didn't lend out raw rice." The chief ignored his wife's words, grabbed an axe, and intended to hack her. No one in the courtyard intervened, they were all watching the spectacle. Even the chief's son said nothing, his eyes filled with accusation towards his mother. Sarah cried, "I really didn't lend raw rice, I lent cooked rice." The chief swung the axe forcefully at her arm. Blood splattered everywhere on the ground. Sarah trembled all over from the pain, running frantically around the courtyard, losing one of her shoes. As she ran, she kept saying, "It really wasn't me, I really didn't lend out any rice." The chief's expression was savage. He said, "You beast, you caused this disaster. I'll kill you before I die." Seeing that a murder was about to happen, my grandfather quickly stopped the chief. He said, "Stop hitting her, we need to run. Running to the Guanyin temple might still save us." The chief's face darkened. He said, "Daniel, carry your Uncle Edward out from the West House." Daniel nodded and quickly ran into the West House, but then ran back out just as quickly. He said anxiously, "Father, Uncle Edward refuses to come." The chief frowned and said, "What's that stubborn old man trying to do?" Part 5. After saying this, the chief entered the West House. Everyone in the courtyard followed him into the West House. Now, no one dared to go alone, fearing harm from the demon. The chief snapped, "Edward, what are you doing causing trouble?" Edward was paralyzed on the mud bed. He had been crippled for 7 or 8 years and could only be carried if he wanted to get off the bed. Edward's face was like ashes, but his eyes were piercing, completely black with almost no whites, looking very sinister. Edward let out a few laughs. He said, "No need to run. The threshold of this room of mine is made of peach wood. You can come in, but the demon cannot." Edward's voice was hoarse and inhuman, as if something was rattling in his throat. Everyone in the room exchanged glances, whispering. The chief frowned and said, "Why didn't I know about this?" Edward grinned, revealing his perfectly white teeth. He said, "Before Father died, he feared foul things entering my room, so he specifically used peach wood for the threshold. This threshold has been here for 7 or 8 years." After Edward finished speaking, he stared at everyone in the room. His completely black eyes looked increasingly eerie, as if he were possessed. They didn't look like the eyes of a living person, and everyone in the village also felt Edward's eyes were strange. Thomas couldn't help but ask, "Edward, why are your eyes so black? You can't see the whites at all." Edward looked at Thomas and said, "I've been paralyzed for 7 or 8 years, rarely leaving my room. After a long time, my eyes changed. If you're scared, go hide in the Guanyin temple." Thomas was stunned for a few seconds, remaining silent, looking as if he wanted to speak but couldn't. Edward then looked at the chief and said, "The demon cannot enter the room, let everyone come in and hide." The chief frowned and yelled towards the courtyard, "Everyone, quickly get into the West House and hide." Everyone in the courtyard scrambled into the West House. Only Sarah remained standing in her original spot, her face pale, her eyes filled with terror. The chief said angrily, "Wife, what are you doing standing in the courtyard? Come in quickly." Sarah's voice was trembling. She said, "Someone is pulling my leg, not letting me go." The moment Sarah finished speaking, there was a huge, thunderous asterisk boom, a lightning strike that shook everyone to their core, making their scalps tingle. The sky turned completely dark. Edward laughed cunningly. He said, "She's the demon, don't believe anything she says." Sarah desperately hit her left leg, screaming as she hit, don't come over here, let me go." Sarah's expression shifted from fear to ferocity. She yelled like a madwoman at her left leg, "I didn't borrow your rice, how did you get in? Tell me how you got into the courtyard. Who is the vengeful spirit after all? Don't frame me." Boom, another clap of thunder. Then heavy rain poured down, drenching Sarah. On her left leg appeared 2 bloody handprints. The shape of those bloody handprints clearly showed them clutching Sarah's leg tightly. Everyone in the room was stunned, their eyes wide, staring at Sarah, not daring to even breathe loudly. Part 6. Sarah screamed like a madwoman, "Let me go. If you don't let me go, I'll chop you with the axe." After saying this, she reached for an axe nearby. First, she gave a fierce look at everyone in the room, then raised the axe and with a grim determination chopped off her own left leg. As she chopped, she kept repeating, "I'll chop, chop, red fills the ground." Daniel exclaimed, "Father, my mother's gone mad." The chief frowned and said, "She's not your mother, she's a demon." The moment the chief finished speaking, Sarah burst into laughter. She said, "The demon is in the West House, you fools." Sarah's face was deathly pale, her eyes bloodshot, and she laughed incessantly, her laughter chilling. But very quickly, she collapsed into the rainwater, completely still. Her leg was still bleeding, staining the surrounding rainwater red. Everyone in the room exchanged glances, their eyes filled with horror. The chief said, "Don't panic, everyone. It'll be fine once day breaks. Everyone stay alert tonight, don't fall asleep." Everyone in the room nodded, not daring to even breathe loudly. Outside, the rain grew heavier, and the sky was terrifyingly dark without a speck of light, so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Edward sat on the mud bed, a triumphant look on his face. It was unclear what he was so happy about. Everyone in the room felt that the vengeful spirit was dead, and they all breathed a sigh of relief, resting in the room. Only my grandfather's expression was serious. He walked to the threshold, carefully squatting down. The threshold had some rotten, unstable spots. He pulled off a splinter of wood from it. He put the wood in his mouth to chew, but quickly spat it out. My grandfather's face was filled with horror. He said, "This threshold is not peach wood, it's pagoda tree wood." The village elders used to say that peach wood wards off evil, but pagoda tree wood attracts yin energy, so no one building a house would use pagoda tree wood or plant pagoda trees in their yard. Pagoda trees were only planted near burial grounds to shade ancestral graves. The moment my grandfather finished speaking, everyone in the courtyard was stunned, their eyes filled with terror. Edward, who was paralyzed on the mud bed, instantly changed his expression, as if a vengeful spirit had possessed him. He said in a sinister tone, "Lewis, stop talking nonsense. This threshold is indeed peach wood." My grandfather scowled and said, "It's not pagoda tree wood. If anyone doesn't believe me, break off a few pieces and chew them. Everyone in the village has this skill. Chew the wood a few times and you'll know what kind it is. Different woods have different tastes." Hearing my grandfather's words, Edward immediately panicked. He angrily said, "The threshold is for blocking demons. No one is allowed to touch it. If you don't want to be in this room, you can get out." The chief frowned. He broke off a small piece of wood and put it in his mouth to chew. After a few chews, he spat it out. The chief's face turned grim. He didn't speak for a long time. Lucas anxiously asked, "Chief, is it peach wood or pagoda tree wood?" Seeing the chief remain silent, Lucas also broke off a small piece of wood. He chewed it a few times and then spat it out, angrily saying, "This is pagoda tree wood. It's the kind that attracts demons. Edward, you bastard, are you trying to kill everyone?" Edward pursed his lips and snapped, "Why can all of you walk and jump? Every time you visit me, you leave me with a few sarcastic remarks. I know all of you wish I was dead. Well, this time you all stay here and wait to die?" The moment Edward finished speaking, the chief slapped him, making Edward's mouth bleed. The chief's expression was serious, his eyes fierce. He said, "The raw rice, did you intentionally lend it out?" Part 7. Edward's face wore a malicious grin. He said, "Yes, I lent it out. The demon is in this room. None of you will survive." As Edward spoke these words, his completely black eyes emitted an eerie, greenish glow. In his eyes, I seemed to see a ghostly figure, a long-haired woman in a red dress, her hair so long it almost touched her toes. But in a flash, the red-clad ghost woman vanished. Everyone in the room was furious at Edward, but outside was pitch black. There was nowhere to run, so they could only stay in the room. Lucas's expression was vicious. He said, "You beast, you deserve a beating?" "Yes, beat him." Everyone in the room clamored in agreement. The chief scowled, glancing at the people in the room. They all feared the chief, and in an instant, silence returned. No one dared to speak anymore. The chief grabbed Edward's shirt, angrily saying, "You've been paralyzed for 7 or 8 years. How could you lend out rice? No one carried you out of the room today? Speak up." Edward's face twisted into a grin. He said, "Big brother, for these 7 or 8 years, you wouldn't think I know nothing beyond eating and drinking, would you?" After Edward finished speaking, a strange sound emanated from his throat. His mouth didn't move. It was entirely a sound coming from deep within his throat. I heard movement on the rafters. I looked up towards the rafters and saw several rats crawling there, their eyes emitting an eerie, green light, staring intently at the people in the room. The chief trembled all over with anger. He said, "Edward, I think you've gone mad. Did you send rats to lend out the rice? Are you that hateful? I've pampered and served you all these years. What more are you dissatisfied with?" Edward snorted coldly and snapped. When the coal mine collapsed before, if it wasn't for saving you, would I have been crushed and paralyzed? You taking care of me is only natural and just. 8 years ago, there was a coal mine behind the mountain. Villagers all went to the back mountain to dig coal. One day, during heavy rain, about 7 or 8 villagers went into the coal mine. The mine collapsed, and everyone except Edward was fine. I glanced at the people in the room. They were all the ones who had gone digging coal during that heavy rain 8 years ago. Just a few days after Edward was paralyzed, his wife, Holly, ran off with another man. The chief then sold Edward's courtyard and his rice fields, bringing Edward back to his own home to care for him. Hearing the words, coal mine, everyone in the room changed their expressions, as if they were hiding something. The chief frowned and said, "The past is the past, don't keep dwelling on it." Edward snorted coldly and snapped, "If I could go back in time, I definitely wouldn't have saved you. No, if I could go back in time, I wouldn't have gone to dig coal that day." The moment Edward finished speaking, a very bright flash of lightning streaked across, illuminating the entire room. Instinctively, I looked towards Edward. I just felt that Edward wasn't normal. On Edward's neck, there were actually signs of cadaveric lividity. After the lightning passed, Edward's neck returned to its normal appearance. Everyone in the room saw it too, but no one dared to speak, all too stunned with fright, only daring to communicate with their eyes. Edward removed the quilt covering his legs. The moment the quilt was removed, I smelled an unbearable stench, like the decaying odor from a corpse. Edward's face twisted, his smile becoming increasingly sinister, the corners of his mouth tearing all the way to his ears. Immediately afterward, there was a huge asterisk boom asterisk, and the windows in the room vibrated, buzzing. Edward stared at the chief and said, "Big brother, I died 7 years ago. You tormented me to death alive. Do you remember?" As Edward said this, his eyes were wide, his face ferocious, his eyeballs seeming to bulge out. His voice was sinister, carrying a murky resonance like a vengeful spirit crawling up from hell, seeking to claim lives. Part 8. The moment Edward finished speaking, there was a deafening asterisk crash and the windows shattered. Cold wind forcefully gusted in from the broken glass, bringing with it rain that made it impossible to open one's eyes. Edward's head twisted grotesquely. His legs had long since rotted beyond recognition, covered in white maggots. There were even rats, one having dug a hole in his thigh, and within that hole were newborn rat pups, a truly repulsive sight. Everyone in the room was scared to death, not daring to even breathe loudly. The chief, especially, was so terrified that he collapsed, paralyzed, to the ground. He said, "I didn't torment you. I always took good care of you. Edward, you can't blame me for your grievances." Edward's neck suddenly elongated, stretching to about 1 meter long. His neck was covered in cadaveric lividity and riddled with tiny holes. Looking closely, one could see these small holes wriggling, filled with black insects that burrowed into Edward's flesh, ceaselessly devouring it. Edward was consumed by furious rage, veins bulged on his neck, and the black insects hidden within were forced out. His entire body was covered in these crawling insects, and when they were gone, only a myriad of bloody holes remained, at least several thousands. Simultaneously, they all opened, and everyone in the room was stunned rigid, their eyes wide with terror. Edward furiously declared, "All the suffering I endured, all this torment was bestowed upon me by you. I want to claim your life." Edward's neck grew longer and longer, his face on it becoming even more ferocious. In a matter of brief seconds, his neck stretched to 2 meters long. The chief, terrified, stumbled and crawled, fleeing everywhere. No one in the room dared to stay either. They all scrambled out of the room. Outside the room was pitch black, so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. You couldn't even distinguish east from west, north from south. You'd trip if you tried to walk. Edward's neck extended out from the shattered window, his putrid, decaying face emitting an unbearable stench. He roared furiously at the chief. "You deserve to die. All of you deserve to die. That rainy day, you all dragged me to the coal mine, causing my back to break. I want all of you to pay with your lives." Edward wrapped his neck tightly around Thomas. I heard the sound of bones shattering. Thomas was strangled to death, his body limp like a heap of mud, his eyes forced out of their sockets, a truly gruesome death. Edward let out a piercing, strange laugh. His voice was hoarse and low, carrying a heavy resonance. The villagers were all dumbfounded with fear, standing rooted to the spot, forgetting to run. Edward's neck continued to stretch, his face bearing a sinister smile, his eyes entirely black. My grandfather's expression turned grim. With the axe in his hand, he circled behind Edward. Edward was strangling Daniel, and seeing that Daniel was about to be choked to death, my grandfather raised the axe and chopped off Edward's head. Red blood splattered all over my grandfather, smelling horribly. Seeing Edward dead, the villagers all breathed a sigh of relief. Edward's neck, stretched to about 10 meters, was still wriggling on the ground, as if searching for Edward's head. Part 9. The chief said in fear, "Quick, chop that thing off too." My grandfather took the axe and chopped Edward's neck to smithereens. Edward's head moved grotesquely a few times, then fell still. My grandfather's face was covered in cold sweat. He said, "We need to run to the Guanyin temple." The chief said, "Edward is dead. There's no demon in the courtyard anymore." The lights in the West House were on, providing a meager, faint yellow light that allowed faces to be seen clearly. Lucas suddenly screamed, as if struck by something. He said, "There's a demon. There's still a demon." The chief scowled and said, "Don't talk nonsense." Lucas cried out strangely, his eyes wide. He said in terror, "It's true, I saw a bloody hand grabbing my leg." Everyone in the village was stunned, their eyes filled with panic. My grandfather said, "Don't panic, everyone. Let's test again. There are still 5 or 6 villagers in the courtyard." The chief said, "What if it turns out there's still a demon?" My grandfather's face darkened. He said, "We'll ask for the demon's location. The hour of judgment has passed, and in a few more hours it will be dawn. This vengeful spirit won't be so powerful anymore." The villagers were all considerably frightened. Lucas said, "Uncle, do you have a way to get rid of the vengeful spirit?" My grandfather said, "Vengeance has its consequences. If we hand over the person who harmed it, it won't cling to us." Lucas gritted his teeth. He said, "All right, there's no other way." My grandfather got half a bowl of water and a chopstick, stuck the chopstick into the water, and it quickly stood upright. Black smoke also rose from the chopstick. My grandfather said, "This is a great evil. This vengeful spirit's resentment is immense." After saying this, my grandfather sprinkled raw rice on the ground. The raw rice that fell to the ground emitted black smoke. My grandfather stared at the chopstick standing upright in the bowl of water and asked, "Who is the demon?" The bowl of water made a jarring clattering sound, and the chopstick eventually tilted towards my grandmother. Everyone in the courtyard was stunned, turning to look at my grandmother. My grandmother's face was filled with terror. She said, "I'm not a demon, I really am not." My grandmother's voice was trembling as she spoke. The chief gripped his axe tightly as if he intended to kill my grandmother. My grandmother, in a panic, stamped her foot. She said, "I'm not a demon. It must be a mistake." The chief scowled and said, "On the full moon of the 7th month, demons disguise themselves as humans, and you still say you're not a demon." My grandmother anxiously said, "But that's just a legend. Last year on the full moon of the 7th month, I even lent out half a bowl of rice, and nothing happened. This demon definitely wasn't brought on by borrowing rice." The chief snorted coldly and snapped, "You still dare to argue? For everyone's safety, you must be killed." After saying this, the chief moved to kill my grandmother. My grandfather quickly stopped him. He said, "Chief, calm down a little." The chief said, "Calm down, my ass." The chopstick pointed at her. "She is the demon." My grandfather said, "Everyone, change positions and see where the chopstick points." Behind my grandmother was the storage room, pitch black inside. No one knew what might be within. Everyone in the courtyard exchanged glances, no one speaking. The chief hesitated for a few seconds, then opened his mouth and said, "All right, change positions." After everyone in the courtyard changed positions, this time my grandfather stood in my grandmother's original spot. The chopstick in the bowl of water stood up, making a rattling sound, and a cold, eerie wind rose. The chopstick eventually tilted towards Lucas. Lucas was stunned for a few seconds. His face filled with terror, he said, "I'm not a demon. This chopstick is flawed." My grandfather's face grew grim. He said, "Let's test again. Everyone change positions." Everyone in the courtyard changed positions. This time the chopstick actually pointed towards the chief. The chief frowned and said, "This chopstick is not right." My grandfather's face became grim, his eyes showing fear. Seeing no one speak, the chief said again, "Full moon of the 7th month, lending raw rice, a demon will disguise itself as a human and enter the courtyard to harm people." "But why is this chopstick pointing randomly?" My grandfather scowled and said, "The legend of demons disguised as humans is just a legend. It's not necessarily true." The chief said with a helpless expression, "If it's false, then what about what Edward said? The demon is definitely among us." After saying this, the chief stared at me. His expression was fierce. He said, "Just now when we did the chopstick test, this kid was always absent. I think this kid is the demon." Scared by the chief, I quickly hid behind my grandmother. Elder Liu, who had remained silent all this time, suddenly spoke. He said, "All right, all of you, stop arguing. I think the demon has always been right beside us, but it hasn't shown itself. The direction the chopstick points is correct, proving that the demon is standing right behind that person." Elder Liu's words sent a chill down my spine, making me break out in a cold sweat. The chief said, "Elder Liu, do you mean we can't see the demon?" Elder Liu nodded, his eyes filled with despair, his voice hoarse as he spoke. "Do you remember what day today is?" Everyone in the courtyard was stunned. After a few seconds, their faces turned grim. Their eyes widened as if they had seen a ghost, and the hairs on their arms stood on end. Elder Liu's face darkened. He said, "Today is Holly's death anniversary. You all know in your hearts how Holly died." The moment Elder Liu finished speaking, a very bright flash of lightning streaked across. I saw a woman in a red dress standing at the gate of the West House. Looking closely, her clothes were not originally red but stained red with blood. Her hair touched her toes. I couldn't see the demon's face. My scalp tingled with fright. Everyone in the courtyard also saw the woman in red. After the lightning passed, the red-clad woman vanished. Lucas trembled all over with fear. He said, "Holly has returned to claim lives. It wasn't me. It has nothing to do with me. They were the ones who tricked her into the coal mine. I just couldn't resist for a moment and wronged Edward. Edward's back was deliberately broken by the chief. It has nothing to do with me." The chief said that only by making Edward a cripple could she belong to the men in the village. It was all the chief. Lucas tried to run, but he kept spinning in place. His head suddenly seemed to be crushed by something, literally squeezed to a pulp, blood flowing everywhere. The chief ran towards the courtyard gate, but after only a few steps, he stumbled and fell face down. He said in fear, "Tricking her into the coal mine was Lewis's idea. It has nothing to do with me. If Lewis hadn't said she was in the city and you could sleep with her just by spending money, no one would have dared to trick her into the coal mine. It was all Lewis's idea." The moment the chief finished speaking, there was another very bright flash of lightning. The red-clad woman stood directly in front of the chief. The chief's neck was unnaturally elongated, his limbs also stretched. His entire body was pulled to 5 meters long, a truly grotesque sight. I hid beside my grandmother, clutching her clothes tightly. My grandfather was terrified of the red-clad woman. He wanted to jump into the well, but before he could reach the well, his mouth was torn open. Red blood covered the ground, and I could see my grandfather's skull beneath his skin. My grandfather's entire epidermis was peeled off while he was still alive. My grandmother hugged me, trembling all over. The red-clad woman walked past right in front of me. Each step she took left a bloody footprint. There were also mournful cries. Her silhouette grew further and further away until she vanished. After the red-clad woman disappeared, the sky brightened. Dead bodies littered the ground, an eerie sight. My grandmother didn't even bother with my grandfather's corpse. She just held me and left, never to return to the village again.